In this video, I'm going to present a detailed guide to HR assistant interview questions and answers. Specifically, I'm going to go through the 10 questions that come up most commonly in HR assistant interviews, and I'm going to show you how you can plan strong answers to these that will help you get the job. So the first question you want to prepare for is those questions around confidentiality, and you've got to show a good understanding of this. So they might ask you a question like, how would you manage confidential information? Or they may ask a trick question about something that's confidential to see if you would do the wrong thing. So let's plan out an answer to this that will show that you have a detailed understanding of confidential information, not just the basics, but actually that you know quite a lot. So to answer this question, plan it around 4 key aspects. Firstly, talk about the fundamentals, the really basics of HR confidentiality. Then talk about spoken confidentiality, the way that you're going to behave with speaking to do with confidentiality. Then talk about the digital systems where you've got information stored and how you're going to maintain confidentiality there. And then physical documents, or things that are printed, how they are stored and maintained correctly to maintain confidentiality. So the fundamentals are that you will have regular access to confidential information. So in your interview, you say that you know that you will have access to confidential information, so you acknowledge it. Then you explain that breaching confidentiality seriously damages an organization. Could you imagine if every single person in the company found out what every single person's salary was all at the same time? That would cause chaos, and there would be lots of negotiations. People would start applying for jobs elsewhere. People would be demanding pay rises. It would be chaos. It's important that lots of information is kept confidential. Then you talk about the fact that information can be shared on a need-to-know basis. It's not like being a doctor where you would refuse basically any request for information. HR is a part of the organization, and people do need to know. So conversations with HR aren't 100% private, 100% confidential. There is information that does have to be shared, but that has to be done on a need-to-know basis. For example, if someone said that they had been offered a job at another company and they were accepting that job and they were starting in 2 weeks' time, and that they didn't want you to tell their manager and that we wanted to keep that quiet until they actually left, that's probably something you're not going to be able to agree to, because that person will need to be replaced, an advert will have to be placed, and their manager would have to be aware of that. You can't just let the person leave after 2 weeks, have no one in that job, and then start the recruitment process. So there can be times where you can't maintain 100% confidentiality. So that is also one of the difficulties in HR, is the employee versus employer relationship. Then you talk about spoken confidentiality. So you don't discuss anything that is private in public. You're always aware of your surroundings and who could be listening. And so lots of conversations will take place in an office behind a closed door to maintain that confidentiality. That any conversations should always happen at an appropriate time. And then you say that you will always apply professional discretion. Then we talk about the digital aspect. So you're going to follow cybersecurity best practices. That's a good phrase for your interview, that when you're using computer systems, you always follow cybersecurity best practices. So by that, we mean that you're always careful about what websites you're visiting, that you are not replying to email from unknown senders, you're not clicking on links in emails that you don't recognize. You're just following those advice that you get from the IT department. Then you say that you always use strong passwords and that you would never store information outside of authorized systems. So, for example, using your own USB sticks or sending things to your personal email, that all confidential information must be kept on company systems. Then physical, so controlled access, anything that is printed, only the right people should be able to see that. That paper records should be stored securely behind lock and key, and that you would never leave confidential documents unattended. So, for example, if you took out a document that had a list of salaries, you wouldn't leave that on your desk for anyone to read. That would be taken, referred to, and put straight back, and you would ensure that no one was able to read that document that should not have access to that document. And so that's how you plan not just a basic answer. A lot of people just say very basic things, but here is a really detailed answer that covers a wide range of confidentiality and shows a higher level of understanding. And that's what you need to do to score well on these questions. The other thing that you can say just to wrap up your answer is that you'll always follow best practice, all laws to do with confidentiality, and you will follow the company's confidentiality policy. And that's just simple commitments that you can make to round off this question. Let's now look at another question that's very common, which is how do you manage a heavy workload? So, as someone who works in HR, you may have lots and lots of tasks and there will be very busy periods. So, they will ask, how do you manage that? And you don't want to go into immense amounts of detail here. Let's just get three key ideas that you can talk about. So, the first is you have to prioritize. So, I'm suggesting you look at the Eisenhower matrix, which is a nice way of prioritizing. So, learn how that works. That's one thing you could talk about as a tool. But the first aspect is you have to prioritize. There are certain things that have to be done right away, and there's certain things that are long-term projects that you can pick up and put down depending on what your workload is. Then you want to say you've got a strong work ethic and good productivity. So you might have a very high workload, but you do work very hard and you are very effective at what you do because they're important skills. So you are going to get through a lot of that workload. Then the next thing you say is that you will use good communication and collaboration. So you're communicating with your team so they exactly know where you're up to, how much you're getting done, and you'll collaborate with other people around you to ensure that everything is up to date. And if it is the situation where lots and lots of work is coming in that is very urgent and it is physically impossible to do it all at once, you will talk with your manager, the HR manager, and you will collaborate with them to ensure that service levels are always maintained. So keep it general, talk about prioritizing, say that you've got strong work ethic and you work really well, you're very productive, so you do get a lot done, but that you also communicate with the rest of your team and seek support when needed. And that's how you plan a really strong answer. Let's look at question 3. How would you manage conflict between two employees? This is something that you will have to deal with as someone who works in HR. It's one of the key functions of an HR department. So let's look at the basic things that you would say in answer to this. So the first thing you make clear is you wouldn't ignore it. When you have disputes between employees, leaving it alone and doing nothing is usually the wrong course of action. It's more likely to get worse than to get better on its own. So you don't ignore these issues and hope they go away because they might not. And it will have a very negative effect on the organization. One very, very negative person can spread that negativity around and cause a serious reduction in productivity. Then you say that you would understand the issue. Before you start going in and changing things or saying to someone, you can't do this or you have to do it this way, you have to actually understand it. You don't know why there is a dispute here, why there is conflict. You don't know who's right, who's not right. You just don't understand it yet. So the first thing you say in the interview is that you need to have a clear understanding of the issue. And typically that would mean that you would meet each of the employees individually, because that gives them the opportunity to explain exactly what their side of it is in an environment where they feel listened to and can talk freely. The next thing you say is that your role is to facilitate and lead a resolution, that your job is to do something to fix it. Then you say that what you do it in a rational and transparent way. So when you make a decision, it has to be informed by evidence. It has to be objective. So it's not, I like this person, I don't really like that person, so I'm going to take their side. You look at it rationally and objectively, and you make a transparent decision that you share with both parties that hopefully resolves the situation. Then you say that you always deal with conflict with neutrality and objectivity. You're not bringing in personal biases, you're looking at it objectively and fairly. Then you say that your goal is to seek a long-term, mutually agreeable solution. So these are the key aspects that solves it. But then the next thing you say to finish off your answer is that you monitor and follow up. So you may have solved the problem, you may have put in the right support, you may have identified the issue and a decision has been made. So it may be two people arguing about what is the right way to do something, and it actually just needs someone more senior to make a decision about what the correct way, and that settles it. But you have to actually monitor it. Has this actually worked? Has it not worked? Does more support need to be put in place? Do we need to do something different? And then you go through the process again with an appropriate follow-up. So that's how you go through this answer. I would try and memorize as much as you can and talk through that process from start to finish, and you'll have a really strong answer to this. So let's move on and look at the next question. What are your biggest strengths? Thankfully, this should be a pretty easy question to answer once you have chosen your strength. But let's actually work on how you can make a strong answer to this question. So, the first thing you do is you pick a substantial strength, something that is actually really important to your job. Then have examples ready. So, think about times in the past where you've actually used this strength. And so, instead of just saying, I have this strength, you could say, I've got this strength and I have used this to do this and this and this. And this is what the strength has helped you accomplish. Then you have to make sure that it's essential for an HR assistant to have this skill. So you have to think about what an HR assistant actually does and then link your skill and your strength to that actual job. That's the most important thing you can do. Answering is really simple. Once you've got it, you say, my biggest strengths are, and then list what some of the key strengths are. They may ask for one strength, they may ask for strengths, and you have to be careful to listen out for strength or strengths. If they say strengths, I would choose 3. If they say strength, just choose 1. Then you say, in the past, I've used these strengths or this strength to, and explain what you've actually done. Bring in 1 or 2 examples of when you've used it. And then say, as an HR assistant, these strengths will, and explain how these strengths will make you better at your job. And so let's look at some ideas for strengths that would be quite useful to talk about. So you could say employment law knowledge. So if you've worked in HR before or got some qualifications relevant, you can explain that you've got good knowledge of employment law and that's a developing area for you and you're really interested in it. If you've worked in payroll before, that is one aspect of an HR assistant's role. Depending on what company you have, they may have outsourced payroll, so just be careful about that one. If you do have an involvement in payroll and it says it on the job description, any experience there could be a really big strength for you. Engaging training, so if you've delivered training that's went really well, that could be a strength. If you've got great attention to detail, if you've got experience interviewing, writing reports, if you're a very professional person, if you're highly organized, diligent, or if you're really computer literate, for example, you're great with PowerPoint, you're really good at working with Excel, these are really good strengths to mention. So I'd pick at least 3 of those that apply to you and be ready to talk about them in your interview with examples prepared, and you'll have a brilliant answer to what is your biggest strengths. Then on the flip side, you've got what is your greatest weakness? And this is one that you've got to be careful with. If you pick the wrong weakness, it could harm you. So you want to basically survive this question. You want it to be okay. You don't want it to be negative. You're never going to have a positive answer. You're exposing a weakness. But what you can do is have a generally neutral answer. So the way you answer this is you first start by picking something that is a real weakness. Don't go down the line of doing a fake weakness. So something like, annoyingly, I'm just one of those total perfectionists. I spend too long ensuring all my work is of the highest quality. Well, that's just not good enough. That shows that you're not reflective, you haven't thought carefully about your strengths and weaknesses, you're not aware of what you're not good at. So that's a fail basically on that. Then you talk about what you're going to do to overcome it. So if you identify a weakness, what are you going to do to make that weakness go away over time? Because it's better to talk about fixing a weakness than why your weakness is such a big problem. And then whatever you do, make sure that your weakness is largely irrelevant to HR. It may have a slight effect on your job, but it shouldn't be something at all important. So all the things on the strengths list should not be a weakness. So, for example, if you say something like, I'm a massive gossip and struggle to maintain confidentiality, you're not going to get the job. Because why would they hire you if you can't maintain confidentiality? It's going to be a disaster. So don't say something that is actually important to your job. The way you answer it is extremely simple. You say, one weakness I'm aware of is, just say the weakness. Don't talk about the weakness in great detail. Spend the time talking about, in future, I plan to. What are you going to do to overcome this weakness? Spend more time about what you could do to overcome it. Be development focused rather than talking about this weakness as a huge problem. Some weaknesses you may want to choose is if you only speak one language and you're applying to a company that is, say, English dominated, they don't have a workforce that is very, very bilingual, then that is an okay one. If you're applying to a company that works in lots of different markets and lots of people at the company speak more than one language, don't choose that one. If you're not great at delegating, remember you are an HR assistant, so you're going to be delegated to more than you're actually going to be delegating. And that's something you could work on as you advance in your career. Saying no, if you tend to say yes to lots of things and maybe take on a little bit too much, that's a skill that you can easily develop, and you can develop more understanding of your individual capacity over time. Mental maths, if you're not really quick at your times tables, that's not going to be a big problem. You can use a computer, you can use a calculator, but you can actually get there, just not very quickly, which will be fine. If you're very self-critical, that could be a weakness, and you talk about how you're trying to overcome that and adopt a more positive growth mindset focused on developing rather than criticizing yourself. And that's some examples of good weaknesses you could use. Let's now look at the next question, which is, what does HR do? They can ask a very simple question. It's quite amazing how you can ask questions in an interview. Like, what does your job do? What do you actually do? And people sometimes don't even give good answers to what the job they're applying to actually involves. So let's plan a beautifully strong answer to this. And the way to do it is to categorize the parts of the job in your head. This is not a formal definition of what HR does, but it's just a nice way of helping you remember it. So you think about staffing, all the things that staffing is related to with HR. So list the staffing aspects, then list the management aspect, then list the administration. So if you just go through those three, it's easy to remember because you just think about all the basic things with staffing. So recruitment, staff training, professional development, staff well-being, performance appraisal. So you just go through the basic things with staffing, or human resource planning. These are all the key aspects to do with keeping the organization staffed. Then you could talk about the management. So you talk about disciplinary proceedings. The HR department manages those proceedings. They advise management teams on HR issues. So HR will be the source of expertise in that area. So a manager will contact you and say, what do I do in this situation? And you will give advice. Resolve and manage employee disputes. Ensure that policies are followed. So you're managing the application of policy. You're mitigating risk. The HR department is very important there. If you get something wrong in HR, for example, you break some employment law, it can be extremely expensive to fix. So HR is there to protect the employer against that. And also ensuring a safe work environment. So managing some aspects of health and safety. That is another part of it. And then absence management. So when people are not attending work, they're taking lots of time off, you're the people that are going to be tracking that and following up on the appropriate policies. So you talk about all the things that they manage. And then the administration side, things like payroll, do payroll administration, employee benefits, policies and compliance, maintain employee records. So these are things that are administered, and scheduling of holidays, deciding when people can and can't take their holidays, and keeping the organization appropriately staffed. So that's how you structure it in your head. So start talking about the staffing aspects, then talk about various things that HR manages, and then you can talk about what sort of administration and admin jobs are involved in HR. And by doing this, if you could remember, let's say 60% of what's on there, you've got a really good answer, and you can flesh it out over time. And you're basically showing that you've got an understanding of what's going on. And that's how you answer this question. Then let's look at the next question, which is, why do you want to work in HR? Or alternatively, they may ask, why do you want to be an HR assistant? So they could ask it in various ways, but this is a question that you don't want to make up. It's one of the most likely questions to come up, and basically every interview will have something to do with, why do you want this job? Why do you want to do this job? So make sure that you have an answer planned. If you only plan one answer and actually script it out, this is the one to do it. So I'm going to tell you some things that you may want to put in your answer, and then I would advise you to either pause this or come back to it and just get a pen and paper and write out an answer and learn it. So here's the things to think about. So firstly, what would you actually enjoy about working in HR? Do you enjoy working with employees? Are you a very people person? You enjoy collaborating with other people? You enjoy working in a team? You have an active interest in employment law? These are things that you could talk about as reasons why you'd really enjoy doing this job. You could think about, how does HR match your skills and experience? So have you worked in HR before? Is this a continuation of your career? Have you gained some qualifications in HR and this is the natural step for you in your career? And is this a good match for your skills? So think about the things that HR does and match that to your personal skills and explain that this is the right job for you. You could talk about development and progression opportunities, so that long term you want to take on a more leadership role in HR, and that an HR assistant role is the perfect role for you to develop your HR expertise. Then, whatever you do, make sure that you are really enthusiastic. The more enthusiastic you sound, the better. If you've got a lack of enthusiasm, your answer just doesn't land very well. Some other things that you could mention is, do you see this as a long-term career? If you see HR as a long-term career, say so. If you have an active interest in maintaining and improving employee well-being, and that's something that you care passionately about, mention that. Explain why it is a perfect match for my skills. It could be that you're seeing the HR assistant role as the perfect entry into HR, that it's the right level for you at this time and it gets you in the door and helps you develop an HR career if you're at the beginning of your career. It's a very essential role. Companies, particularly large companies, simply would not function without a well-organized HR department. People wouldn't be paid. The policies wouldn't be followed. It would cause big, big problems for the organization. You talk about the positives of the employer. So why do you want to join this company? Have a sentence or two ready about why you want to work for this company. You could also talk about the fact that it's very diverse, that you're going to be doing lots and lots of different roles, and every day is going to be different. You want a job where you can be moving around and doing lots of different things. You've got diverse and interesting work. So I'd pause it now. Get as many of these ideas as you can, formulate a strong answer, learn it, and be ready to go with that. Now let's look at a more general question, which is they may ask towards the beginning of the interview something like, tell me about yourself, talk me through your CV. These sort of questions, just quite informal sounding, but they are really powerful opportunities to really show off your skills. So let's not waste this opportunity by talking about things that are irrelevant. Let's actually plan a really good answer. So I'm going to give you some suggestions about what you can say in answer to this question. So you first start about talking about your work experience. Then you talk about your skills and qualities. Then you talk about your interest in the role. They're not interested in random facts about where you were born, where you grew up in your childhood. They're not relevant. Talk about the things that are actually going to help them make a hiring decision to decide to take you on. So these are the three areas you want to focus on. So you start with the experience. So any HR experience or training you talk about first. You don't have to go through your CV in chronological order, starting with your most recent to your most distant job. You want to focus on talking about your most relevant rather than just your newest or most recent. Focus on the relevant. So any HR experience or training or qualifications that you have in HR, that's what you start with when talking about your experience. Then you go on to talk about your broader relevant experience. If you've had other roles where you've been on the other side, where you've been an employee and you've dealt with HR and you've seen it from both sides and you've developed experience working within an organization outside of HR, that brings in some good broader experience, and talk about what you learned and gained from that. And then any qualifications that you have, that could be a qualification in some software, some high school qualifications that are relevant, or some HR qualifications. They would be really strong, or something that shows a understanding of business or law would also be great to enhance your answer. Then you think about the skills and qualities that they want. So payroll experience. If your HR function that you're applying to has payroll, definitely talk about any experience there. If you've got experience working with any HR software, even if it's not the one that this company uses, they're all broadly similar. And so skills in one would transfer. So talk about that experience. If you've got experience interviewing, definitely mention it. Say that you're very professional. Say that you're highly organized. Say that you're a reliable person. And then what I would also do is have a read at the job description and try and mention, when telling them about yourself, how you match that job description. Then talk about the interest in the role. So basically have 2 or 3 sentences at the end of this question saying why you're interested in this company, how it matches your personal interests. Talk about previous success you've had in HR and how this would be a continuation of it. And then explain how this job matches your career goals. So why is becoming an HR assistant the right step for your career? So talk about these 3 aspects. list all the qualities, give them a good description of your experience, and explain why you actually decided to apply for this job and how that matches with you personally. And you'll have a great answer to this. And you've shown off what they actually want to hear and made full advantage of this question. Let's move on to question 9. So this is how you deal with the tell me about a time question. So they could say, tell me about a time you did this, tell me about a time you did that, give me an example of when you have done this. They're all very vague. I can't tell you exactly which one will come up, but it's likely they will ask some situational questions. I'm going to show you how you can answer any of these and then show you the most common ones that I've seen come up in HR interviews for HR assistants. So the way you answer any of these is with the STAR technique. You start with the situation. So basically, when was this and where was it? Where did this happen and when exactly in your career did it happen? Basically, paint a picture of the situation. Then explain the task. What did you actually need to do? What was the goal? Then your action. What did you actually do? And then how did you succeed in the end? The result should always be something positive. Never ever choose an example that went wrong where you didn't do the right thing. Even if you're talking about a failure, you want it to be a failure but not a catastrophic failure. A failure that was ultimately fixed in the end would be a better answer. So let's look now at the questions that often come up. So made a mistake or failed, improved a business process or system, disagreed with a coworker, overcame a problem, went above or beyond, worked under pressure, met a tight deadline. So these are the examples that you should have ready to go. So feel free to screenshot this or write down these, and I would have one example ready for each of these. You don't have to plan every single one out because that'll take forever. You just have to have one example. So I'd say 1 or 2 words for each of these that mean something to you. So if they ask about these, you can go, right, that's my go-to example. So that'll mean that for the most common ones, you have an example ready to go. And that will really help with your confidence in the interview. It's hard to think up examples on the spot. So if you've thought already about the most common ones, you'll be one step ahead. So that's how you deal with that. The next one I want to talk to you about before I give you some final tips is some questions that you could ask at the end of your HR assistant interview. And if you get to the end of the interview and they ask, do you have any questions for me? And you say no, that's really bad. You must have some questions ready. So I'm going to give you 6 suggestions. Feel free to take as many of these as are appropriate, but I would pick and choose which ones you think are your favorite. So you could say, could you tell me more about the training, professional development, and progression opportunities at your company? You probably want to know this, and it shows that you're really interested in developing and getting better, and you care about your training. You could say, I am, of course, very interested in this position. Therefore, I'd be interested to know the next steps in your recruitment process. Show, one, that you're interested in the job, that you're still a firm candidate, but also that you really care about what happens next. And to be honest, you probably want to know when you're going to find out and what happens next. So you might as well ask it. You could say, could you give me an example of an HR project that I could be working on if successful, and show a real interest in that, and basically explain to them why you would be the right person to work on that project and what you can bring to that project. It's a good time to bring back your skills and show them that you are a good employee and you're someone that's going to be useful to employ. Then you could say, what is your favorite thing about working here? They will tell you what they like, and you can share in their enthusiasm for that. You could also say, could you tell me more about the team I would be working with and how my role fits within your HR function? That's quite a nice question to ask. And then you could say, is there anything that you would recommend that a new hire do prior to starting to ensure that they are well prepared for day one? And if they suggest you should do this, read about this, they may actually refer to some of your previous answers and give you advice on what you need to learn to improve your skills, and you can make a commitment to doing that. And that's a really positive way to end the interview. Now, the other thing you have to do is know your company. So I'm suggesting that you prepare a fact file. So before you go to interview, make sure you've got your facts straight. So here's a simple template for all the sort of facts that you should take to the interview. So feel free to pause it here. I'm going to finish on this slide. I would definitely take the time to just fill this in. So the bottom ones, you're just going to tick off that you've done it. And the other ones, if you fill this in, and then you learn it and you go to your interview and they ask, what do you know about our company? You can start rattling off and reeling off all this information. And believe me, once you've done this and filled it all in, memorize it, then look away Imagine you being asked that question and answer it, and you'll be so much more confident and you'll really impress them with your knowledge. So I hope this video was helpful to you. If it was, please like and subscribe below and post in the comments what questions you were asked in your HR assistant interview to help everyone else out and get a broad understanding of all the questions that could come up. And finally, thank you very much for watching.